Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today, we're going to be discussing the danger posed to Israel and the Jewish community by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran's President Ahmadinejad has threatened to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. He continues to deny the Holocaust, and Iran is the world's leading sponsor of international terrorism, sponsoring groups like Hezbollah and Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and even supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan. Iran is also an abuser of human rights and has abused the rights of Jewish minorities, Christians and other religious groups in Iran, and continues to be a menace to not only the world but also the Middle East. And in this program today we'll be discussing why doesn't the world wake up to the danger posed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And joining me on today's program is Zalmi Unsdorfer, who is the chairman of Likud Herut. Zalmi, welcome back to the Middle East Report. It's great to have you on the program. Last time we had you on the program, we were discussing the Israeli elections,
which have only just gestated into a coalition, which I think the last day of its formation is supposed to be today. Otherwise, all hell breaks loose. So.
Absolutely, I think. But we need to do in a program once we know the full nature of the Israeli coalition. But coming back to the Middle East Report, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in representing Likud Herut, which is the political party of the current Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, I wasn't a political animal to start off with, but I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. And didn't have anything to do with Holocaust studies, never went to see Schindler's List, still haven't seen it. Just closed that part of my life off, and then at one time I went to Auschwitz, Poland, to see the flypast of the IDF, an IDF Holocaust, son of a Holocaust survivor, was a pilot, and he took a squadron of 3 F-15s over the death camps, and I felt that would be a good time for me to actually face that era. And ever since then I've looked at life through the prism of the Holocaust, and I started reading up on Jewish affairs, a lot of the writings of Menachem Begin, who was the founder of the Herut party, which then morphed into the Likud party, and started writing on Jewish themes, and then they asked me to become a chairman of the Likud in the UK, and that's really the story.
Excellent. And just putting aside the terrible economic problems that the world economy is in, the probably next biggest pressing foreign policy challenge of this generation is the threat of the Iranian nuclear threat. In your opinion, why does the Islamic Republic of Iran pose such a threat and danger not only to Israel but the Jewish people?
Well, you know, on the subject of, you know, speaking as a child of Holocaust survivors, the Holocaust which Ahmadinejad denies is what killed my grandparents and uncles and aunts and so forth. And it is only if you do not learn the lessons of history, you're bound to repeat them. I think where Iran is concerned, the most telling statement comes from the Nobel laureate Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, who was asked once, "What is the lesson you've learned from the Holocaust? Of the one thing that you could pass on?" And he said, "If someone threatens to kill you, believe him." And Ahmadinejad is someone who is threatening, as Hitler did, mass killing of Jews, genocide. And Israel believes him. Unfortunately, the rest of the world hasn't gotten round to that yet.
And we have a clip to go to now that's entitled Israel Views Nuclear Iran as an Existential Threat.
For decades, Iran's government has continually challenged Israel's right to exist, often threatening Israel with complete destruction.
The lesson of history, especially for the Jewish people, is that when someone says that they want to annihilate you, it's safe to believe them rather than to hope for the best.
It seems to me that the Israelis face a very difficult situation. Their country is small. Their population is small. They have suffered many, many decades of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. And they can't go a week or a month without hearing some senior Iranian figure talking about annihilating, eradicating, destroying the state of Israel, denying their right to exist in that part of the world.
Hello and welcome back to the Middle East Report. Zalmi, we saw that clip there with the former Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, really talking about the dangers posed to Israel and the Jewish people from the threat of Iran. Now, it's very interesting. I remember going to, a few years ago, to a talk by Ephraim Levy, Israel's former head of the Mossad, an intelligence agency, in which he said that he spent 60 to 70% of his time dealing with threats from Iran. Maybe that should be an indication how much the Iranian regime is committed to the destruction of the State of Israel. And it's about time the rest of the world took notice of this threat.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the fact is that Iran is the godfather of terror in the Middle East, and it is also exporting that terror into Europe, whether it's Bulgaria, whether it is elsewhere. It's not going to stop. It is only getting emboldened by nations who are refusing to classify these people as terrorists and to identify who the sponsors of that terror are. But it beggars belief that with what goes on in Syria today, in terms of Iranian backing of all this Syrian bombing by the Assad regime and this slaughter of, coming up to 60, 70,000 people. People still do not see the evil that is being projected into this region, and all funded by oil money. And it's not going to get better; it's going to get worse. And I think the sooner people wake up, as you say, to it, the better.
But haven't we lost a sense of moral responsibility? But also, we've lost this moral sense to call evil what it is, evil. And that's essentially what the Iranian regime is about. It's about exporting terror and exporting the Islamic revolution, not only that threatens Israel, but also threatens the entire Arab world and the Sunni identity of the Middle East.
Well, yes, the world has got a big problem in calling evil by its real name. And many news organizations will not use the T word. The BBC hardly ever uses the word terrorist. And until you actually identify your enemy and the threat, you'll never be able to fight it. Israel has, for long, as Donald Rumsfeld said in that clip, identified and had to deal with this on a daily basis. Israel has not had one moment of peace in 65 years since its formation. Every day has been a day when it has had to look out for who is going to bomb us, who is going to terrorize us, who is going to kill our civilians, who's going to invade our schools and take hostages, this kind of thing. So it's very skittish, and it's very, very aware of its surroundings. But I think the world is just a little bit too comfortable, 6,000 miles away.
I just want to read you something, of course, my notes, which was produced by the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs on Iranian incitement against Israel. And it says here that the Iranian genocidal incitement against Israel has intensified and escalated in 2012, with the website of the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, declaring that there is a religious justification to kill all the Jews and annihilate Israel, and Iran must take the helm. Former Spanish Prime Minister José María Aznar disclosed in May that the Supreme Leader of Iran warned him that Israel was a cancer and must be burnt to the ground and made to disappear from the face of the earth. Several days later, the Chief of Staff of the Iranian Armed Forces, Major General Hassan Farbazdi, declared, and this is what he said, the Iranian nation is standing for its cause, the full annihilation of Israel, implicating unfairly the people of Iran. The last person, and if we read that quote, the last person to make such genocidal statements against the Jewish people was Hitler. And we saw what happened with the rise of Hitler and his influence through Mein Kampf was the destruction of 6 million precious Jewish lives, including your family. And yet it seems like the world is silent to this threat of genocide now that Jewish people are facing again here in the 21st century.
Well, this time the Jews are able to take care of themselves. There's no question that Israel will take care of itself. It will take care of its people. There's 6 million now in Israel. And the foreign powers, the European powers, and even the Americans have got their own interests. And certainly Europe is acting from a position of what is in our interests. And there's trade, there's oil. They have a different set of priorities. And until the Iranian nuclear threat is actually brought to their doorstep in some, God forbid, horrendous way, they're really not going to wake up to this. They're just going to continue saying that it's all Israel, it's Israel's problem, it's all miles and miles away. But unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of parallels. You mentioned Hitler. Yes, dare I say that, you know, Hitler's pact with Mussolini is perhaps very similar to what is happening between Iran and Syria. Is Assad Mr. Ahmadinejad's Mussolini? You know, they're forming an axis here, and that's what happened in the war. And I think everybody needs to wake up a little bit more quickly, because unfortunately, one of the most significant things in this time is the very, very poor standard of leadership in Europe. We don't have any Churchills this time. Everyone can see the kind of people who are running Europe. And we're not impressed.
No, I'm not surprised. But one thing, surely, you mentioned earlier in the programme that we must learn the lessons from history. And maybe something that we've actually forgotten is that if we allowed this incitement to genocide to continue, and that's what's happening from Iran's leaders right throughout the regime, forming alliances with Syria, supporting international terrorist groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and others, that what could be targeted against Israel will not finish with Israel, and could actually then trigger a wider conflict that could even lead to a global war. So surely it's important that Europe, the United States, takes this threat seriously and starts dealing with Iran before it's too late.
Well, unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that the Jews are the canary in the coal mine of civilization. And what starts with the Jews ends with everybody else. We're living in an age now where the propaganda should not necessarily pervade as it was, because we now have huge media, we have huge communications, instant communications, and we have the ability to actually project images in real time all across the world. Unfortunately, a lot of the news organizations and a lot of the journalists are simply not telling the truth. And I think they will have a huge responsibility in the final analysis, however this plays out. If it plays out badly, journalists will be blamed for not telling the truth about what is going on. They're not telling the truth about what's going on in the Palestinian refugee camps. They're not telling the truth about what is going on in the Middle East. They're not telling the truth about the repression in various parts of the Middle East for, I don't know, whatever reason, economic reasons, advertising reasons, oil reasons, or even just access. A lot of the journalists in the Gaza Strip will only film what they're told to film, because they're told, otherwise we will not give you access to areas in the Gaza Strip. So there is this horrible Faustian deal going on between the media and the Islamic jihadist groups. And that is starving the world of the true information that they need to rise up in the way that you've said that they should.
Well, hopefully the Middle East report can do something to counter the misinformation and lies put out by so much of the mainstream media in this country, so that we can have a real reflection and a real look at really what's happening behind the headlines. I've got a quote here to talk to you, Zalmi, about. This was produced in May of 2011 by the UN. Its International Atomic Agency, the IAEA, revealed that Tehran has been working on a sophisticated triggering technology that could be used for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is setting off a nuclear weapon. The next month, Iran announced it was planning its triple production of higher grade uranium enriched to 20%, and was moving centrifuges to its new Fardo enrichment facility near Qum. which is located inside a mountain. And then in September 2011, the IAEA noted that it was increasingly concerned that Iran was conducting experiments on warheads and nuclear payloads. 2 months later, the IAEA reported presented the existence of the Iranian engineering studies for replacing the conventional warhead and the re-entry vehicle on the Shihab-3 missile with a new device. Now, surely this is a big game changer in the Middle East. If Iran develops nuclear weapons, has the capabilities of firing them, then the implications are huge, not only for Israel, but the Arab world, maybe even European security.
Well, actually, a couple of years ago, I was quite resentful of this phrase, game changer. Obama was saying it at the beginning of his campaign and the beginning of his presidency. But it's not a game. This is a very serious business for us, for the Jewish people. And it is not just for us, it is for the world. I think, we all remember, we're old enough to remember Chernobyl, and that was just a nuclear leak. But it affected us. We had, poisoned sheep in Devon and so forth. If there is going to be a nuclear exchange, which involves Israel, there will be repercussions for the whole world. Not just in terms of shutting off oil in the Persian Gulf and whatever else have you, but there will be a severe health problem affecting Western Europe. People need to wake up to this, and they're not, as I said before, alive to it. I hope that will change.
And do you believe that the sanctions placed on the Iranian regime by the EU and by Britain and by the United States is actually having an impact on Iran? Certainly it's having a devastating impact on Iran's economy, but there's great determination with the Iranians to actually achieve nuclear weapons capability purely out of pride. Is time running out on Iran's nuclear weapons program? And could we see military action either by the Israelis or by the Americans to actually stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons?
Well, Obama recently, very recently said that there's another year to go before Iran reaches nuclear weapons capability. But I think Israel is running on a very different clock. Netanyahu, our party leader, said in the United Nations, with that famous caricature of a bomb, that the critical period will be in the spring or summer. And America is now saying another year. But America is working to a different timetable, and there's a very important reason for this. America is able to go into Afghanistan and carpet bomb. And, Britain was able to go into Dresden and carpet bomb. And the Russians were able to go into Chechnya and carpet bomb. Israel can't do that kind of thing. Israel has to do a surgical operation, as it did in Iraq. When it bombed the Saddam's nuclear reactor under Menachem Begin, when he took that decision, they went in there at the quietest time on a Sunday, I think it was, to make sure there was minimum casualties. And for blowing up an entire nuclear industry there, there were remarkably few casualties. It was a surgical strike with a humanitarian edge to it. The Americans and the British and the world powers don't actually work to that standard. So they feel that when things really get serious with Iran and they wake up one morning and there's a nuclear bomb being wheeled out someplace, they can send off 1,000 Tomahawk missiles, shock and awe and so forth. That's not something that Israel is capable of doing or will ever do. So they will go in much earlier, and I think America does know that.
And we've got a clip to go to now entitled The Iranian Time Bomb.
A new report from the UN nuclear watchdog has found that Iran has installed and activated nearly 200 advanced centrifuges at their Natanz facility, which experts believe could help the Islamic Republic enrich uranium 3 to 5 times faster than previously expected, moving them closer towards obtaining enough enriched material to develop a nuclear bomb.
This new report by the United Nations is of grave concern because it shows clearly that the Iranians are more close than ever before to having enough enriched uranium for a nuclear weapon, and that simply cannot happen. We cannot allow the Ayatollahs in Tehran to have a nuclear weapon. Now, this issue, I'm sure, will be at the very top of the agenda when President Obama visits Israel next month.
Iran maintains that their nuclear program is solely for the peaceful development of power, which is allowed under international law. However, many Western countries, including Israel, dismiss such claims, with Netanyahu stating this week that sanctions alone will not stop the nuclear program of Iran. They have to be coupled with a robust, credible military threat. The 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council and Germany are due to meet representatives of Iran in Kazakhstan on February 26th for further negotiations, with the US stressing that the window for a diplomatic solution will not remain open indefinitely.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Zalmi, what I have great concerns about is the US administration. Certainly since President Obama won the election in 2008 and he's been re-elected in 2012, there's been a real reluctance, unlike his predecessors, to actually involve American military conflicts around the world, certainly liberal interventionism. And with the appointment of Chuck Hagel as his new Secretary of Defense, I doubt America's willingness under President Obama to actually confront Iran, which means that it would leave Israel in a very, very dangerous situation and very vulnerable to actually take on Iran's nuclear facilities.
Well, that's true. Everything we've heard about Hagel suggests that he's anti-war. Everything we've seen recently about the rush to exit from Afghanistan and Iraq, leaving it not really in a very good state. I mean, it's only a question of time before Iran starts to reoccupy these areas and turn them into Shia centers of terror, and it's not a very rosy outlook. But unfortunately, America is war weary, and America has got some serious debt problems right now. It's not about to go into anything new willingly, whether it's Iran or even Grenada. It just doesn't want to get involved. And Israel really has never had to ask anyone's permission to defend itself. It's quite prepared to defend itself. And frankly, if there is a world opprobrium against Israel, well, frankly, there's been world opprobrium against Israel when Israel has been trying to make peace. So, you know, if you already, I think I heard Menachem Begin's son, who recently was in government, when he came to London, he said about world censorship of Israel. He said, "I would rather we were harshly criticized than elegantly eulogized." And I think really that's what we believe in. We're going to do the right thing. We're going to do what needs to save our people. There's not going to be a second Holocaust, certainly not by Mr. Ahmadinejad. We've seen people like him off down the generations, and he will also be just another statistic on that line.
And it very much reminds me, Zalmi, of the Book of Esther. I know that the Jewish community celebrated Purim not long ago, but it's also a reminder to us today that the Jewish people face that same threat of genocide and annihilation as they did in the time of Esther and the Book of Esther in the Bible. And it's so interesting again today that Iran is again the instigator of genocide against the Jewish people. And we know what happened to in that story.
Yes, well, you know, we're in the season of Passover, and in every generation there will always be someone who rises up to destroy us. And there will be, you know, deliverance this time, as there always has been deliverance. We have that faith. That's the narrative of the Jewish people.
When it comes down to looking at Iran, I mean, we've just looked at the genocidal statements by Iran's leaders. We've looked at Iran's nuclear weapons program, how that could actually lead to an increase in terrorism, and certainly means that Iran could support international jihadist groups without fear of retaliation. It would protect their regime. And also, I think it's important to look at the fact that Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of international terrorism, and in particular that Iran sponsors groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. There's even been support for the Taliban, and there's even cultivated the new Al-Qaeda leadership that fled the Torbor Mountains in Afghanistan in 2001. We know that they have operatives in Europe and in South America. And surely by the United States or by the Western world actually confronting Iran, we'd see a huge decrease and decline in the terrorism threat that the Western world faces.
Yes, it's a multi-headed hydra. People still are in denial about these links, but anyone with open eyes can see that this is a snake with many heads. And in fact, Saudi Arabia itself asked America to cut off the head of this snake. They know the truth, because it's their people, and they recognize the danger as well. This is a very serious axis of evil. It has limitless funds from oil. It is in league to a large extent in Syria with Russia. Russia's protecting it, arming it with anti-aircraft missiles and so forth. It's a dangerous situation. And as I say, the world needs to have accurate journalism. The world needs to have the truth told to it. And this is why I say, the media has a very big responsibility in this.
And we've got a clip to go to now. It's entitled Axis of Terrorism, Iran, Hezbollah and Hamas.
The 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. were the worst tragedy in the history of terrorism, spurring unprecedented outrage and solidarity among the world's civilized nations. From the Pandora's box of radical Islam had emerged a wave of Islamic terrorism aimed at so-called infidels.
وإذا كانت اليوم هي عاصمة الكاثوليك وعما قريب إن شاء الله ستفتح روما كما فتحت القسطنطينية ستكون عاصمتهم نقطة متقدمة للفتوحات الإسلامية التي تنساح في أوروبا كلها ثم تلتفت إلى الأمريكتين بل إلى أوروبا الشرقية.
Faced with the severity of the new threat, the targeted countries forged an alliance for self-defense and national security, and an international war on terrorism was launched. While Al-Qaeda claimed undisputed celebrity status for the 9/11 attacks, it is only one member of a much larger family of radical Islamic organizations. Among them is Hamas. While less familiar to the world beyond the context of its conflict with Israel, Hamas is an integral part of the Islamic terrorism network and one of the cornerstones of the terrorist triad that also includes Hezbollah and Iran. Hamas has a long heritage of terrorist activity and is recognized as one of the world's most extreme, dangerous organizations. In the organizational pyramid of terror made up by these three groups, Iran sits at the top, serving as the ideological leader for its two proxy armies, conveniently positioned along Israel's borders. As the ideological mentor of both Hamas in the Palestinian territories and Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran provides them with indoctrination, training, financing, weapons, and intelligence. Hezbollah and Hamas leaders are frequent and welcome visitors to Tehran, where Iran's religious mullahs set the ideological tone. A tone which is translated into uncompromising terrorist policies to be applied in their respective theaters of operation.
دورات بغيت لبنان مش دورات عملت مناورة مناورة امتى كانت أول مناورة؟ آخر 2003 وين عملتها؟ بإيران.
In a recent interview with Britain's Sunday Times newspaper, a Hamas operative revealed the depth of Iran's role as mentor to the terrorist organization, stating, "Iran is our mother. She gives us information, military supplies, and financial support." The Hamas combatant described in great detail the clandestine process of training, which begins with trainees illicitly crossing into Egypt, where they board flights to Damascus and then travel on to Tehran. There, in highly secured military encampments, they begin a rigorous 6-month training regime under the close supervision of Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards. They learn and perfect their skills in weapons operation, tunnel evacuation, booby trapping, sniper fire, advanced guerrilla tactics, and explosives and rocket manufacturing, like this homemade IED nicknamed Shawaz, which incorporates advanced technological know-how imported from Iran.
They also remain a country that is the primary funder for Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Look at any problem in the Middle East, Iran is funding insurrections.
Iran invests large sums of money in the dissemination of radical ideology, the manufacture and smuggling of weapons, and the provision of financial incentives to terrorists.
It is very clear that Hamas is being armed, and it's very clear that they're being armed in part by the Iranians.
Perhaps the most incriminating evidence of direct Iranian arms transfers to terrorist organizations was the interception of the ship Karine A in January 2002. The ship was carrying a cargo of $15 million worth of advanced weaponry to the Gaza Strip. Apart from its ideological objectives, Iran fosters the militant, subversive activities of its terrorist partners in order to divert international attention from its own illicit development program for nuclear weapons. Iran continues to supply enormous amounts of indigenously made weapons to Hamas by land and by sea. The 122mm Grad rockets that rained down upon the cities of southern Israel during the recent round of hostilities, as well as various types of mortar shells, RPGs, and assault weapons, were manufactured in Iran and smuggled into the Gaza Strip through tunnels running beneath its border with Egypt in the Sinai Peninsula. The possibility of Hamas and Hezbollah operating under a future Iranian nuclear umbrella introduces unfathomable challenges and implications to an already foreboding environment.
رسالتي إلى اليهود الحاقدين فوالله الذي لا إله إلا هو سنلاحقكم في كل مكان فنحن قوم نشرب الدم وعلمنا أنه لا دم أطيب من دم يهود.
Hamas is merely one local chapter in the global network of radical Islam. As such, it is less familiar to Israel's Western allies in the struggle against terror. While its profile may be lower, it remains a fundamental element in the web of extremist organizations that continue to plague the world with barbaric acts of premeditated violence.
وكأنهم يقولون للعدو الصهيوني إننا نحرص على الموت كما تحرصون على الحياة.
The fanaticism that kills children, women, and men in New York, London, Madrid, Washington, and other cities around the world is the same fanaticism that kills people in Sderot, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and other Israeli cities and towns. Eradicating the threat to any state's right to live in security must be the shared responsibility of all those who fall victim to the vile attacks on humanity perpetrated by members of the terrorist brotherhood.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. That was an extremely scary and frightening clip, but it does show the true realities of the threat posed by the Islamic Republic of Iran, not only to Israel, but to the Middle East, and also in our effort to confront international terrorism. And it's time that the world really woke up to this danger and to this threat before it's too late. Zalmi, what concerns me the most is that if we look back in history, it almost seems as if history is repeating itself. Back in the 1930s, we had Neville Chamberlain, who was the British Prime Minister, who clearly Britain played a high cost during the First World War and was very, very reluctant to go to war, even to rearm and confront the rise of Hitler and the rise of Nazism in Germany. And yet again, in our day, here we go, in the 21st century, we see a similar development taking place across the Middle East, that the Iranians and their sponsors are preparing for war. They're building up their armed forces. And yet here in Britain, we're actually cutting back on our military spending. And you can see the same mistakes being made. And surely now's the time for moral leadership and clarity in the world. And maybe one of the very few leaders who is showing true leadership in the world is the Israeli Prime Minister and the leader of your party, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yes, he is. Many say he's obsessed with Iran. But I guess that if you wake up every morning under an existential threat, that's something to be obsessed about. As I said before, we don't have any Churchills apparent in this generation, and I see only weakness across the whole of Europe. I really do. I think perhaps some of the Eastern European countries, such as Poland, which have recently come into the EU. They're a little bit more realistic because they know what freedom is, and freedom's pretty new to them, and they don't want to lose it. Unfortunately, in Western Europe, freedom is something that everyone's taken for granted, and they just do not see any possibility of it being taken away from them by something that's happening thousands and thousands of miles away. I think they're in for a rude awakening.
Actually, one of the great dangers with Europe and the whole EU approach, not only to the Middle East but also to the Iranian threat, is that Europe prouds itself on being a soft power. But it's and I've said this on many occasions, and when you visit the European Parliament, you visit the European institutions of power, it's very much like the emperor's new clothes, that the emperor is actually naked but he doesn't see it. And without economic power and without military power, you can't be a force. And so Europe's trying to fill a role that it can't. And what concerns me greatly is that there's no moral courage coming out of the European Union, certainly not by the European Commission when it comes to Iran, and that even some member states in the European Union classify Hezbollah as a charity. The EU itself refuses to classify Hezbollah as an international terrorist organization because they have representation in the Lebanese parliament. And even the British government's position on Hezbollah is trying to divide Hezbollah from its military wing to its political wing, which you can't do. So surely it's time that the realities of the threat posed by Hezbollah, which is sponsored by Iran, that our Western leaders start to take note.
Well, America has obviously for long classified Hezbollah as a terrorist group because it has lost several lives, not least in the Beirut barracks bombing, where like 250 Americans were killed by these people, by Hezbollah. There were some French people. There were, I think, 20 or 30 French casualties and deaths in that same bombing. But France is still not prepared to classify the Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. But it is interesting why Britain is looking at this military and political wing, because that is the experience that it is resting on from Ireland. And I think it is absolutely essential that people in the United Kingdom realize that this is not an Irish issue. The IRA was not an existential threat to Britain or to Northern Ireland or to the British troops. They didn't want to liquidate British people. They didn't want to commit a genocide. Iran does. This is a very, very different situation. But unfortunately, people like Hezbollah and the groups of jihadist Islamists are fooling around. They're playing with the European system because, as you say, it's a very soft organization in the European Parliament. They will sit there talking and so forth, and they have their rules and regulations, and it takes a long time to do anything. But Iran's playing with these people. They're playing with the West and gaining more and more time to build their weapon.
Yeah, very much so. And what concerns me very much is that despite the courage of the Bulgarian government, particularly in its investigation into the terrorism act that occurred on their territory in July of last year in 2012, in which 5 Israelis tourists were killed or murdered, and the Bulgarian bus driver. Now, according to the Bulgarian government, they say that Hezbollah was directly involved in this, so it directly has Iranian involvement and sponsorship, and yet the EU still refuses to classify Hezbollah as a terrorist organisation, despite the fact that Hezbollah has committed terrorism on European soil.
The EU has a very poor record on dealing with terrorism. It's been a revolving door for terrorists, whether it was Leila Khaled, who was allowed out of Britain after the hijacking, and whether it was the Munich massacre of Israeli athletes. Those Palestinian terrorists were set free by in a most ignominious fake hijacking some weeks later. The jihadists know that the Europeans don't want terror in their own backyard. They don't care what happens else. Just don't bring your terrorists to us. So there's a dynamic there. Okay, this Bulgarian situation was slightly, I think was a very bad step by Hezbollah. But they will say Bulgaria is on the fringe of the EU, but we'd never do it in Germany or France and so forth. And I think it just remains to be seen how much they can control themselves before their next gaffe.
And we've got a clip to go to now, and this is Israel's President Shimon Peres talking to the heads of state in Europe, including the EU, about the need to classify Hezbollah as an international terrorist organisation.
Israeli President Shimon Peres has delivered scathing criticism of Iran and its proxy Hezbollah at the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Peres called the Iranian regime the greatest danger to peace in the world and urged European Union lawmakers to formally declare the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah a terrorist organization. The European Union has been under pressure to name Hezbollah a terrorist organization since Bulgarian authorities said its members were responsible for a terrorist bus bombing in July 2012.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Clearly, Israel's doing an incredible diplomatic effort in order to get the EU and hopefully Britain as well to classify Hezbollah as an international terrorist organisation. This is something that I've done in more detail with my European report. And thankfully, there are leaders in Europe like the MEP Charles Tannock, who's a Conservative, who has fought tirelessly in order to get Hezbollah blacklisted as an international terrorism organisation. Now, one of the great dangers of not classifying Hezbollah as a terrorist organisation, Zalmi, is surely that Hezbollah have the freedom to finance terrorist operations in Europe, to train and recruit, and so therefore this is actually detrimental to Europe's efforts to counter terrorism.
Yes, and unfortunately, in the same way as European laws and European norms prevent people from pulling people out of ponds because of health and safety reasons. It's paralyzed. It's paralyzed by its own laws. And no one knows that better than the jihadists. And they're playing it for all they can get. They're playing the aid program. They're playing they're infecting our campuses in Britain with hate speeches. And no one seems to care, and no one seems to be doing anything about it. And they're all protected by all of these laws. And you see these clips of this hatred being spewed all over the world, and the bombing of the Twin Towers, and all of the bloodshed that goes along. And you have to wonder why, in a world like that, the only people who are being vilified are the Jews. It's, we are effectively the people of the book, but they want to kill the messenger, and we're the messenger that they want to kill.
Well, no, history and the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob has other ideas. We know that for sure. I really want to bring up another issue, another continent in which Iran and Hezbollah is involved in, and that's a little bit in South America. And I find it astonishing that there was a first attack by Hezbollah in Argentina, in Buenos Aires in 1992, which, according to my notes here, killed 29 Israelis in the embassy attack. And then in 1994, there was an attack on the Jewish Cultural Center in which over 84 people were killed. Yet the Argentinian government refused to come to terms with this. And now the president of Argentina, her name is Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, has now called for a truth inquiry to involve Iran in that inquiry. Now, surely this is just appeasing terrorism and appeasing Iran, and surely Argentina's behaviour is absolutely shameful, not to mention the Falkland Islands.
Well, the idea of a truth commission involving Iran is an absurdity. I mean, this idea sounds almost as absurd as if we would invite the Saudis to investigate 9/11. But you know, I give credit to President Kirchner, the husband of the current president, for keeping this inquiry alive for so long. Many would have just buried this whole thing, saying it was just Jews, so let's move on. But this inquiry has been running for years. But unfortunately, his wife, who has now been president for, I think, 5-6 years, has a different agenda here. You know, under her 5 years or so of tenure, she's like tripled the trade with Iran. You know, Argentina is Iran's 7th biggest trading partner. So they're doing like $1 billion worth of trade with Iran. And that's, I think, what drives this particular agenda. It's not going to produce anything credible. It's just going to give a public relations victory to Iran. And I can understand why the Israeli leadership, including the moderate Shimon Peres, are upset with this development.
And we've got a clip to go to now that looks at the Truth Commission that's taking place in Argentina over the bombings of the Israeli embassy in 1992 and the Jewish Cultural Center in 1994.
Argentine President Cristina Fernandez has defended her country's Truth Commission with Iran, which was set up to find out who is responsible for the bombing of the Amir Jewish Center in Buenos Aires in 1994, which killed 85 people. Fernandez said she's committed to the Argentina-Iran deal because she wants to know the truth about who orchestrated a cover-up and who had been hiding evidence. But opposition leaders have condemned the commission, and mass protests have been held against it on Argentina's streets. Israel has described it as inviting a murder to investigate his own killings. Argentine prosecutors believe Iran ordered the 1994 bombing, though the Islamic Republic has denied having any role and has never allowed the suspects to be questioned.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Zalmi, I think if we look at really since the 1970s and certainly since the emergence of the Islamic Republic of Iran after the Islamic Revolution in '79, Iran has been at the epicenter of international terrorism. We can see that not only is their terrorist activities not only confined to the Middle East, but also extend to that of Europe and South America. There's even discussions now that Iran is very much working with the drug cartels in Mexico and smuggling arms and weapons into the over into the United States, which poses a terrorism threat to the United States of America as well. But something has to be done, doesn't it, for the victims of terrorism and for the families, and that they deserve justice. And surely we need the UN to take stronger action, also the American government and the European governments in actually holding Iran to account for the number of terrorist activities in which they've been involved in.
I don't think we can expect anything from the UN at all. I have absolutely no confidence in the UN. I don't think Israel has much confidence in the UN either. The UN's record here is extremely biased, and the UN's sponsorship of UNRWA, which is the special refugee organization set up specifically for the Palestinians, its record is egregious. It's employing Hamas people, and it's perpetuating the Palestinian refugee problem. There were 700,000 displaced people in 1948, and now they're registering 5 million Palestinian refugees. 40% of them are Jordanian citizens. The amount of true refugees is about 1% of that. It's about 50,000 people. So the UN will give us no solution to this. What needs to happen is this terror organization, this Murder Incorporated, which I think it's nothing less than, needs to be shut down. It can be shut down. It's interesting that India this week has had problems in importing its oil from Iran because of the insurance companies are refusing to insure the shipments and the refineries. It's that kind of thing which will shut down Iran's source of funds. And I think also the European countries, as we spoke about earlier, have to face this reality and start getting more serious about this and have the political will to change the status quo.
Zalmi, I just want to thank you so much for joining me on today's Middle East report. I think one thing we have to be aware of, that we've probably presented very much a depressing picture, but it is the reality that we have to deal with. And sometimes when you present truth, it's difficult. It's stuff that we don't want to deal with, but we have to deal with it if we're actually able to confront the terrorism threat that not only Israel faces, but also Europe and Britain faces as well.
I agree. We just need the truth to come out.
Okay, Zalmi, I just want to thank you again for being my guest on the Middle East Report, and I just want to thank you all for watching today's programme. We've very much presented here a bleak picture of the threat posed to Israel and the Jewish people and the Western world by the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's important that we work with our MPs, our MEPs, to tell them about the great danger that Iran poses to our freedoms, and we need to stand with Israel and the Jewish people to pray for their protection and confront this terrorism threat posed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And thank you very much for watching today's Middle East Report.
القول قول الصوارم كي تسترد المظالم حتى الأراضي نساموا رسول أهل العزائم. القول قول الصوارم كي تسترد المظالم حتى الأراضي نساموا رسول أهل العزائم. ما دنسوا لي حمانا لو طوقته الضراغم. حثالة البغي صارت فأين عهد الحواسم. ناسوا بأننا أبات نذود ذود القشاعم. نحن الذين وطئنا بالخيل عرش الأعاجم. المظالم حتى الأراضي نساموا رسول أهل العزائم. القول قول الصوارم كي تسترد المظالم حتى الأراضي نساموا رسول أهل العزائم. نحن الذين بنينا حصوننا من جماجم. سقنا حليلات كسرى بالسوط سوق الغنائم. رسولنا من صنعنا بنات مجد أكارم. رسولنا شمس حق أضاء وجه العوالم. المظالم حتى الأراضي نساموا رسول أهل العزائم. القول قول الصوارم كي تسترد المظالم حتى الأراضي نساموا رسول أهل العزائم. أنار مشكاة ليل من الضلالات قاتم. وصاغ من بعض قوم جيلا مع الفجر قادم. فحطموا رأس باغ وذللوا كل ظالم. حربا على كل حرب سلما لكل مسالم. المظالم حتى الأراضي نساموا رسول أهل العزائم. فالقول قول الصوارم كي تسترد المظالم حتى
suspected of carrying illegal cargo. You hereby requested to stop.
Vous voyez les lettres, ce sont des marques iraniennes. Ce sont toutes les marques de l'armée iranienne.